The morning sun cast long shadows across the backyard as I stood at the kitchen window, nursing my third cup of coffee and staring at the monstrosity that had dominated our outdoor space for the past 15 years. The in-ground pool, once a symbol of suburban success and summer dreams, now resembled something more akin to a concrete crater filled with murky water that hadn't been properly maintained in months. The filtration system had died sometime during the harsh winter, and the cost of repairs, along with the endless maintenance, chemicals, and insurance headaches, had finally pushed my wife Sarah and me to make the decision we'd been dancing around for 2 years. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Sarah asked, appearing beside me with her own mug, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and nostalgic melancholy. $23,000, I replied, shaking my head. "That's what they quoted us, to bring it back to life. And that's just the beginning. New liner, new pump, new everything. We could take a real vacation for that money, maybe even 2. The pool had been the previous owner's pride and joy, installed in 2008 when the housing market was still riding high, and everyone believed their home values would climb forever. When we bought the house in 2009, getting it at a steal due to the market crash, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. A pool in Connecticut. Our friends were envious, our kids were ecstatic, and we felt like we'd finally made it to the middle-class promised land. But reality has a way of puncturing dreams, doesn't it? The first summer was magical. Pool parties, barbecues, kids splashing around from dawn to dusk. By the second summer, we'd learned about pH levels, chlorine shock treatments, and the mysterious art of pool maintenance. By the third summer, we'd discovered that our steal of a house came with a steal of a pool, one that leaked approximately 200 gallons per day and required constant refilling. Year after year, the problems mounted. The deck around the pool began to crack and shift, creating a safety hazard that insurance companies love to write stern letters about. The automatic cover system jammed permanently in the closed position, requiring professional removal that cost more than our first car. Winter after winter, we'd anxiously await spring to see what new catastrophe awaited us under the tarp. But it wasn't just the money, though Lord knows that was reason enough. It was the space. Our backyard, which should have been a place for gardens, gatherings, and maybe a proper patio where we could actually relax, was instead dominated by this enormous concrete hole that we used maybe 30 days a year. Sarah had dreams of vegetable gardens and fruit trees. I fantasized about a workshop or at least a shed where I could store something other than pool equipment. The breaking point came during last summer's heat wave when the pool pump finally gave its death rattle on the hottest day of the year. As I stood there sweating in 95-degree heat, staring at a pool full of water that was rapidly turning the color of split pea soup, I realized we were essentially paying thousands of dollars annually to maintain a very expensive, very dangerous swamp. "That's it," I declared, marching into the house and leaving wet footprints on Sarah's clean kitchen floor. "We're done. This thing is more trouble than it's worth." Sarah had been waiting for this moment for at least 3 years. She'd never been a swimmer, never enjoyed the maintenance, and had grown increasingly frustrated with the way the pool dominated our outdoor space and our budget. She'd been dropping hints about reclaiming our backyard for ages, but I'd been stubborn, convinced that we could somehow make it work, that the pool added value to our property. The research phase had been eye-opening. Pool removal, it turns out, is a legitimate industry with legitimate professionals who do nothing but fill in unwanted pools. The process, while expensive, was straightforward. Drain the pool, break up the concrete, haul away the debris, and fill the space with clean dirt and topsoil. In 6 weeks, we'd have a blank canvas where our concrete albatross once stood. We'd gotten 3 quotes, compared references, and finally settled on Rivera Construction, a family-owned business that specialized in pool removal throughout Fairfield County. Miguel Rivera, the owner, was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd been in the business for over 20 years. He'd seen it all. Pools that had been neglected for decades, pools that had been damaged by trees, pools that had become breeding, grounds for mosquitoes and worse. "You're making the right choice," he'd assured us during our final walkthrough. "I've removed over 400 pools in my career, and I've never had a client regret it. Not one." The permits had been a nightmare, naturally. The town required soil tests, drainage studies, and enough paperwork to deforest a small nation. But finally, after months of bureaucratic back and forth, we had our approvals. The work was scheduled to begin on a Monday in late September, when the summer heat had finally broken and the kids were back in school. What we hadn't anticipated was the reaction from our neighbors. The Hendersons, our immediate neighbors to the left, had been supportive from the beginning. Bill Henderson was a retired contractor who understood the realities of pool ownership and had actually recommended Rivera Construction. Best decision you'll ever make, he'd said over the fence. Pools are money pits, always have been. The Johnsons to our right had been politely neutral, offering neither encouragement nor discouragement. They had their own pool, a modest above-ground model that they seemed to enjoy, and they kept their opinions to themselves. But directly across the street lived Patricia Whitmore, known throughout the neighborhood simply as Karen, a title she'd earned through years of complaints to the Homeowners Association, the police, and anyone else who'd listen about everything, from lawn height to holiday decorations. Patricia was a woman in her early 60s who'd moved to the neighborhood 5 years ago following a messy divorce. She'd immediately appointed herself the unofficial guardian of property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Patricia had opinions about everything. She'd complained about the Johnsons' above-ground pool, an eyesore that brings down property values, the Hendersons' vegetable garden, unsightly and probably violating some covenant, and our own sporadic pool maintenance, a health hazard, and breeding ground for mosquitoes. She'd written letters to the town about noise ordinances, parking violations, and what she perceived as an epidemic of non-compliance with various municipal codes. The morning the work was scheduled to begin, I'd been up since 5:30 a.m., too nervous to sleep. This was a big step, irreversible, expensive, and sure to change our property forever. I'd made fresh coffee and was reviewing the contract one final time when I noticed movement across the street. Patricia Whitmore stood in her front yard, still in her bathrobe, staring directly at our house with an expression that could only be described as thunderous. At exactly 7 a.m., Rivera Construction's trucks began arriving. First came Miguel in his pickup, followed by a small excavator, on a trailer, then a dump truck that would haul away the concrete debris. The crew was professional, quiet, and efficient, exactly what we'd hoped for. But as the first piece of heavy equipment rolled into our driveway, Patricia Whitmore marched across the street with the determined stride of someone on a mission. She was fully dressed now, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face set in lines of righteous indignation. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "Excuse me. What exactly is going on here?" Miguel paused in his conversation with his crew and turned to face her politely. "Good morning, ma'am. We're here to remove the pool. All the proper permits have been filed with the town." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Remove the pool? You can't just remove a pool. There are regulations, covenants, property values to consider." I stepped outside, having heard the commotion from the kitchen. "Good morning, Patricia. Yes, we're having the pool removed. We've been planning this for months." "This is outrageous," she declared, her voice rising with each word. "You can't just destroy a major feature of your property without consulting the neighborhood, without proper notice. This will affect everyone's property values." Sarah appeared at my elbow, drawn by the raised voices. "Patricia, we filed all the proper permits. The town approved everything. We have every right to remove our own pool." "We'll see about that," Patricia snapped, pulling out her phone. "We'll just see about that." And that's when she made the first call. "Yes, I'd like to report unauthorized construction activity at 247 Maple Street," she said into her phone, her voice dripping with officious satisfaction. "Heavy machinery, no proper signage, possible violations of municipal codes." Miguel looked at me with an expression of weary resignation. "This happens sometimes," he said quietly. "Some people just can't handle change. Don't worry, all our paperwork is in order." But Patricia wasn't finished. Over the next hour, as the crew began the process of draining the pool, she made no fewer than 6 phone calls. Code enforcement, the police, the homeowners association, the town planning department, and what sounded like a lawyer's office. Each call was louder than the last, each complaint more dramatic and urgent. "This is affecting the entire neighborhood," she declared to what I assumed was the poor soul manning the code enforcement office. "Property values are plummeting as we speak. There's dust, noise, and who knows what kind of environment." The second day dawned with an ominous stillness that should have been my first warning. No birds singing, no usual sounds of suburban morning routines, just an eerie quiet that hung over Maple Street like fog. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when I noticed Patricia's car was gone, unusual for someone who rarely left her house before noon. Miguel and his crew arrived promptly at 7 a.m., ready to begin the demolition phase. The massive concrete breaking equipment looked like something from a construction site rather than a suburban backyard, but Miguel assured me they'd done this hundreds of times without incident. "Today's the fun part," he said with a grin, patting the hydraulic breaker attachment. Nothing quite like breaking up concrete to make you feel like you're actually accomplishing something. The first blow of the hydraulic hammer against the pool's concrete shell sent vibrations through the ground that I felt in my chest. It was loud, certainly, but well within the legal limits for construction noise. The crew worked methodically, breaking the concrete into manageable chunks that could be loaded into the dump truck. That's when I noticed Patricia's car pulling back into her driveway, but she wasn't alone. A silver BMW followed her, and from it emerged a tall, thin man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. Even from across the street, he radiated the kind of aggressive professionalism that made my stomach clench. Within minutes, Patricia and her companion were standing at the edge of our property, the man taking photographs with a professional-looking camera while making notes on a tablet. When Miguel approached them to ask if they had questions, the man handed him a business card with the crisp efficiency of someone used to intimidating people. "Jonathan Blackwood, attorney at law," the man announced. "I represent Ms. Whitmore and potentially other affected residents in this matter. I need to inform you that you may be in violation of several municipal ordinances and homeowner covenants." Miguel examined the business card with the calm of someone who dealt with lawyers before. "Sir, we have all proper permits and approvals. Everything we're doing is completely legal." Blackwood's smile was thin and predatory. "Legal permits don't necessarily protect you from civil liability, sir. If this construction damages surrounding properties, affects property values, or violates any covenants or agreements, my client has grounds for both injunctive relief and monetary damages." I joined the conversation, feeling my blood pressure rising. "What exactly are you claiming we're violating?" Blackwood consulted his tablet with theatrical precision. "Potential violations include exceeding allowable noise levels, creating dust, pollution, operating heavy machinery without proper neighborhood notification, and, most seriously, potentially violating the original homeowner association covenant that may have required pool maintenance in perpetuity." "That's ridiculous," I said. "There's no such covenant." "We'll see about that," Patricia interjected, her voice tight with satisfaction. "I spent all evening researching the original development agreements. You might be surprised what I found." What followed was the most bizarre legal theater I'd ever witnessed. Blackwood proceeded to document everything, measuring noise levels with a professional sound meter, collecting dust samples in small plastic bags, and photographing every piece of equipment from multiple angles. Patricia stood beside him like a general surveying a battlefield, pointing out various alleged violations and potential safety hazards. The situation escalated when Blackwood announced that he was seeking an immediate temporary restraining order to halt all work until various legal issues could be resolved. He made a phone call to what I assumed was the courthouse, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about irreparable harm and emergency relief. But then something unexpected happened. Bill Henderson, our neighbor to the left, came walking over with a manila folder tucked under his arm and an expression I'd never seen before. Grim determination mixed with what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Morning, Patricia," he said with false cheerfulness. "Fancy lawyer you got there. Must be costing you a pretty penny." Patricia's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Bill, this doesn't concern you. We're protecting property values for the entire neighborhood." "Oh, but it does concern me," Bill replied, opening his folder. "See, all this legal research you've been doing got me curious about some things, so I did a little research of my own. He pulled out what appeared to be official documents, surveys, permits, legal filings. Blackwood's attention was now fully focused on Bill, and I could see a hint of concern creeping into his professional demeanor. "Turns out," Bill continued conversationally, "your property has some interesting history, Patricia. Did you know that when you built that addition on your house 3 years ago, you actually encroached onto town property by about 6 inches? Patricia's face went pale. "That's impossible. I had surveys done." "Oh, you had surveys done," Bill agreed, "but apparently they were done by your brother-in-law's surveying company, and they were, let's call them optimistic. The official town survey, which I requested last week, tells a different story." Blackwood was now examining Bill's documents with the intense focus of someone realizing their client might have problems. "Where did you obtain these surveys?" he asked. "Public records," Bill replied with a shrug. "Amazing what you can find when you actually know how to research properly, but that's not the interesting part." He pulled out another document, this one looking official and intimidating. "The interesting part is that your client has been operating an unlicensed business out of her home for the past 2 years. Online consulting, home-based office, clients coming and going at all hours. Did you know that requires a special permit in this township? And did you know that the homeowner covenants she's so concerned about actually prohibit home-based businesses unless properly licensed?" The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped, while Blackwood was frantically shuffling through his own papers as if trying to find some escape clause. But Bill wasn't finished. "And then there's the matter of the fence." "What fence?" Patricia demanded, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "The fence you built last year along your back property line. 6 feet high, solid wood. No gaps for drainage. Beautiful fence, really. Except it's built entirely on your neighbor's property. The Johnsons' property, to be specific. They've been too polite to say anything, but legally speaking, you've committed criminal trespass and property theft." I stared at Bill in amazement. Our quiet, retired contractor neighbor had just delivered a legal bombshell that made Patricia's complaints about our pool removal look like child's play. Blackwood cleared his throat. "These are separate issues that don't affect the current matter of—" "Oh, but they do," Bill interrupted pleasantly. "You see, Patricia here has been threatening legal action against my neighbors for perfectly legal construction with proper permits. But she's been doing so while actively violating multiple laws herself. In legal terms, I believe that's called unclean hands. Makes it pretty hard to seek equitable relief when you're not exactly following the law yourself." Patricia's face had progressed from pale to bright red. "This is harassment. This is retaliation." "No," Bill said calmly, "this is research. The same kind of research you claim to be doing about pool covenants and property rights. Funny how, when someone actually does proper research, the results are quite different from what you claimed." That's when the most unexpected twist of all occurred. A white van pulled up to our curb, and from it emerged 2 people in official-looking uniforms carrying clipboards and cameras. One of them approached our group, while the other began examining Patricia's property with professional interest. "Patricia Whitmore?" the first official asked. "Yes," Patricia replied warily. "I'm Inspector Williams from Code Enforcement, and this is Inspector Lopez from the Environmental Protection Department. We're here about several complaints that have been filed regarding your property." The blood drained from Patricia's face. "Complaints? What complaints?" Inspector Williams consulted his clipboard. "Well, we've received reports about unpermitted construction, business license violations, environmental hazards from improper drainage, and potential zoning violations. We're here to conduct a full inspection." I looked at Bill, who was trying very hard not to smile. "Did you—" "Public duty," he said quietly. "If Patricia wants to play the concerned citizen game, then someone should make sure she's actually following the rules herself." What followed was the most spectacular reversal of fortune I'd ever witnessed. While Miguel and his crew continued their perfectly legal pool demolition, Patricia found herself on the receiving end of the kind of intensive official scrutiny she'd been trying to inflict on us. Inspector Williams discovered that Patricia's home addition was indeed built without proper permits and extended onto public property. Inspector Lopez found that her backyard drainage modifications had created runoff problems that violated environmental regulations. A third inspector, who arrived an hour later, confirmed that she'd been operating an unlicensed business and owed thousands of dollars in unpaid municipal fees. But the coup de grace came when Officer Martinez returned, this time with a very different purpose. "Ms. Whitmore," he said formally, I need